Hello everyone. Welcome to the official video on how to play If Worlds Collide. Here I will be telling you all there is to know about playing the game. From the various terms, to basic rules, to how to play each scenario created. I will be leaving timestamps for each in the description below. And now, let's get right into it. First off, we have the various terms brought up in the game. To start with, you will often hear players refer to steps, whether it be in movement and the size of the miniature. In regards to movement, steps refers to the typical unit of measurement you use in games, whether it be inches here in the US and I don't know what everyone else uses. I just grow up with freedom units. And steps of size simply refers to the base size of the miniature, whether it be 25mm, 28, etc. And they typically range from size 1 to size 5. Moving on, we have defense, and that is typically split into defense type and defense value. Defense value is the number you deduct off the damage of an incoming attack. For example, say this assault trooper you see before you was hit by a damage 5 attack. You can see that it has a defense of 3. You will subtract 3 from 5, meaning only 2 damage would end up going through. Defense types, on the other hand, include physical defense, being armor, etc., reactive defense, the ability to dodge, and energy defense. Energy shields, magic. These prevent the attack from becoming critical, where the damage from the attack is doubled. So as you can see, when creating a faction, a defense value it would definitely be nice to have, but a defense type is critical. Moving on, we have knack rolls. This is the term for any roll a player must make, like say an ability check or rolling to make an attack. For example, the assault trooper from before must pass a knack 3 roll in order to make a successful attack with its assault gun. And in order to pass such a roll, a player rolls a d6 and must get a 3 or above, with natural 6s always succeeding and natural 1s always failing. Up next, we have environmental effects, which each faction has a table of. At the start of each round, players will alternate rolling a d6, and the player that does rule that round will reference their faction's environment table for the result in question. And all players will undergo the effect in question. Some effects can be detrimental, such as units will suffer some damage or have their movement halved. And some can be beneficial, such as the delicious barbecue environment from the Walker Militias, where each unit may choose between 3 benefits. And others serve to add another factor into the game, such as neutral units or additional terrain factors. And as you can see with this particular table, each environment comes with a tactic penalty. Tactics are special abilities you can attempt with each activation, needing to make the corresponding knack roll in order to succeed. And unless you have a leader nearby that has tactician, only 1 tactic is allowed per activation. Now, failure to make the knack roll for the tactic will trigger the penalty, which the units in question will suffer for the rest of the round. Moving on, we have cover. That is where a unit being targeted is partially obscured by terrain, and thus a little harder to hit. If a unit being targeted has cover applied, then they have +1 to their defense value, and the attacker has a -1 penalty to their weapon knack roll. A quick note on -1 penalty and +1. There seems to have been an unofficial consensus that +1 is a benefit and -1 is the penalty. It's a bit confusing, I know. Anyways, lastly we have weapon types. These range between melee, which is base contact, near, which has a range of 8 steps, and ranged, which can target enemy units anywhere on the board, provided they have line of sight. Do note that the typical map size is 36 by 36. The ranged weapons do come with a downside. If the unit holding it has engaged in melee, then such weapon types can only hit on natural 6s. And that more or less covers the terms. With that, we move on to the basic gameplay rules. Now, we move on to basic gameplay. Starting with the various unit types, which can be found in a typical If Worlds Collide game. That being Infantry, Shock, Specialist, Scout, Support, and Leader. Now, I know veterans of war games will know what each type represents. But if you're a rookie looking to get into the tabletop setting, then allow me to tell you. Infantry is the typical grunt of each faction, be it the standard soldier or warrior with a sword. Your typical strength in numbers type. Shock units are the more elite variants. Units typically carrying more powerful blows or superior firepower. Whether it be on a more infantry scale, such as knights in superior armor, or full-on modern battle tanks. Specialists are self-explanatory. Those that take on a more dedicated role, such as assassins, snipers, more ability-focused units. Scouts are speedy glass cannons, more typically associated with hit-and-run tactics. Support units typically give buffs to allied units, whether it be healing or other types of benefits. And leader units offer additional activation points and options for formation creation. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly are activation points? Well, they are a critical resource that each player makes use of in an IWC game. Each player always gets a bonus of 2 activation points per round, regardless of whether or not they have a leader unit in the roster. But having one will allow you to get more than just 2 per round. If you happen to have one on the field, take their leadership characteristic and add it to the total AP pool per round. For example, say you have a unit with leadership 3. That would give you a cumulative total of 5 activation points per round. Unless you have an ability, tactic, or environment that allows you to do otherwise, you will need an activation point to carry out a set of actions for a unit or formation. That'll be movement, any abilities that might apply, and attacks. However, that is not their only use. Unless there's something preventing you from doing so, you are allowed to use activation points to modify a knack roll in your favor. For example, say you had to make a knack 4 roll for an attack, and you decide to modify it with activation points. You could spend 1 to make the roll a knack 3, or 2 points to make it a knack 2. But think carefully of whether or not you choose to do it. For while it will improve your chances, it will not guarantee a successful roll. For the dice can be quite fickle. I should know. Now, moving over to formation types. The typical rule for creating formations is that you can only do so with units of the same type. Infantry can only form up with infantry, shock with shock, and etc. With support units being an exception, they can link up with any formation they want. However, you do not have to abide by this rule if you have a leader in the formation. But do try to keep them alive if you want to keep a mixed formation active. Now for the typical actions which can be carried out each turn. When moving a unit or formation, you can either choose to move them their movement characteristic. If in a formation, it'll be equal to the slowest unit, unless you have a tactic which will allow you to do otherwise. Or, you can move an additional 4 steps and forfeit the ability to attack. For the abilities phase, you can attempt as many as are applicable. Same can go for weapon attacks. If an enemy is in range, you can attempt the attack. Now, referencing the assault trooper from earlier, you will find that the assault gun has 3 separate attacks. For such a weapon, you can either choose to attempt each and every attack. You can either focus all 3 onto a single target or split each attack into different targets, but you must declare them in advance. Or, you can choose to make a focused attack. The damage calculation for that is the damage of a single attack plus 1 damage for each additional attack. No matter the scenario you choose to play, deployment rules remain the same, outside of a few pedantic details. Each player will roll a d6, the one with the highest value getting to go first. If you tie, just roll again. Once that is done, each player will alternate deploying a unit or formation until both sides are finished deploying. The player that manages to finish deploying first will be the first to roll for environment. And at the start of each round, the player that possesses the lowest amount of activation points will get to start first. However, if the players hold an equal number of activation points, they will roll off for initiative. A standard IWC game lasts for about 5 rounds, no matter the scenario played. Speaking of, let's cover those now, shall we? First Contact is your typical point control scenario. Each player selects a point on the map they want to use as their home zone at the start of the game, excluding the center point. The reason being to prevent an all-melee faction from being able to bum rush a ranged faction in the first round. And it's for that very same reason that if you're playing on a rectangular map, the second player deploys on the far quarters. The big things to remember for this scenario is that you deploy within 6 steps of your home point. To control a point, one of your units must be within 3 steps of the point, with none of your opponent's units being in that range. At the end of every round, you get 1 victory point for each portal you control. And if a unit of yours starts their activation in control of a point, you can spend 2 activation points to destroy it and gain 2 victory points immediately. To win the game, you must either have the most victory points by the end of the 5th round, or be the first to reach 10 victory points and survive by the end of that round. Delphi Prime can be played with up to 4 players. Divide the map into 4 quadrants, and each player will deploy into one of those. But before deployment begins, each player will roll a d12 or 2d6 5 separate times to get 5 unique prophecies. And to get victory points, you must satisfy at least one of these prophecies by the end of the round. Failure to satisfy even one prophecy by the end of the game will result in you losing the game. However, you can choose to sacrifice an undamaged unit to stay in the game. However, you can only do this once. On the other hand, if you manage to fulfill 4 or more prophecies in a single round, you get a favor point, which you can use to modify either your own or your opponent's knack rolls. These can be used even from beyond the grave. Ambush is a special scenario where the defender and attacker's point values actually differ. The attacker can only bring half as many points as the defender. However, they get a surprise round 0, where a portion of their units can make a full set of actions and attacks in an effort to whittle down the defenders. From there, the game becomes a simple deathmatch, where victory is obtained by wiping out the opponent. Last Chance is a King of the Hill style scenario, where players attempt to obtain quote-unquote intel from the center point of the map. They can obtain this by forfeiting a unit's attack action to attempt a knack roll, which, if successful, will achieve a victory point. Each player can only successfully do this 3 times per round. And do be careful who you send in, for at the end of every round, each unit caught within the radius of the point takes 4 damage, ignoring defense value. Heart of Gold is another King of the Hill scenario, but instead of hunting for intel in a center point, the goal is to try to surround the control point at the center with as many of your own units as possible, all the while preventing your opponent from doing so. At the end of every round, each player will obtain victory points equal to the point value of your units in base contact with the machine. Aside from the first round, that is. However, do note, the machine has a tendency to move around at the end of every round, so you're going to be kept on your toes throughout the entire game. The fog draws near may seem like a stock standard deathmatch scenario, but there is a twist. For as you focus your efforts on the opponent in front of you, the very environment becomes your enemy. For as the dead feed the ground before you, the fog draws ever closer, and the dead may very well feed the fog's frenzy. Make sure it doesn't catch you, for if any of your units are caught within the fog at the end of the round as it advances, poof! No matter if it's a soldier or a main battle tank, it's gone, with nothing left behind. Now, we have a scenario which can be played with a single player. Boss Battle. Members of the League of Villains, name pending, seek out a challenge beyond the rifts. Your objective in this scenario is to defeat them before they wipe you out. You select a member you want to face up against, and you bring a roster of equal point value. You can either try to solo them, or you can bring in another player to tag team them. Your choice. So, yeah, that about does it for how to play If Worlds Collide, where almost every type of faction you can think of is in the game, and you have a chance to help dictate the story. If that sounds of interest to you, or you simply want to join a small but thriving community, then join us in the Discord. Link is in the description below. And on top of that, consider watching some of my other videos. And if you've already watched them, watch them again. And if you enjoy my content, leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below as a sacrifice to the most fickle algorithm. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.